This is going to be a really technical set of regs. The deservedly smug look that Toto has had over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, I've seen that look before. If you purely read the sentiment across social media before you went into this, you would have thought that this was going to be an absolutely terrible race to watch. And it wasn't.
Welcome back to the Talking Ball podcast, powered by Arbitrade, back for 2026. And we've got something a little bit different, a little bit new for you this year, post-race debriefs. With me, Tommo McCluskey, and Calum Nicholas.
And
Calum,
me.
Get into it, son. How are we doing?
Mate, really good. Obviously, just finished watching the race. Really enjoyed it. So yeah, looking forward to talking about it and seeing what we come up with.
What's it like kind of not being out there, of course, 15 years at the team, travelling on the roads. How's the adjustment to kind of, 4 a.m. wake-ups now?
Do you know what? It's been a journey. I think it was a very big change when I took on the new role. But actually, what's made it easy is that I've really been enjoying it. I must say, I spent some time with the pit crew a couple of weeks ago, and it did sort of bring back all those things that I miss about the job. But yeah, I it's nice for me. I get to sit here with you and talk about the things instead of now. Currently, I'd be packing up in Australia. So I don't really miss that, I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not surprised you don't miss that bit, fella. Absolutely. But no, good to be back in Australia. Of course, George Russell did win the race ahead of Andrea Kimi Antonelli and Charles Leclerc. It only wrapped up about, 20 minutes ago from recording now. But of course, we're going to focus on all things Oracle Red Bull Racing. Should we just start with the debriefs really from the drivers? I think that's the best place to start because they can speak on things better than we ever could.
Yeah, I mean, it was quite hectic the first laps. You just have to stay out of trouble. Then I think we got quite cleanly through the field. Had some decent overtakes, I think. And then at one point we settled in, I think, in our own race, but unfortunately we had a little bit too much deck. We had a lot of graining on the hard compound, which of course then compromised a little bit our stints. And that, I guess, meant that we couldn't really fight for more. So that's something, I guess, that we have to understand a bit better. But yeah, overall, of course, it's still a decent comeback from P20.
Yeah, absolutely. And thoughts on the whole start and how that went and getting used to actually racing these cars. Is it vastly different from last year?
I mean, I had a problem in the start where I had no battery. So as soon as I dropped the clutch, I had no power. So that's something that we need to understand. And after that, I just tried to keep it clean, trying to get past the cars in the midfield, but at least we learned a little bit what we could do.
Yeah, basically I had fun on the first few seconds of the race. For a second I thought I was taking the lead into turn 1 and honestly 100 meters into the race we started having issues straight away. So we lost all the advantage and everything, the engine sounded funny for the whole race and I knew it was not going to hold on. So it's just frustrating race considering the pace we had in the car. I think we missed out on a very good result, but these things happen so early in this journey. So I'm confident we're going to turn things around.
Yeah, better for it to happen now at the start of the season so you can return even stronger next week, right?
Yeah, for sure. The turnaround is going to be very quick. We need to take our lessons and understand everything super quickly to move on to China and do the best job possible.
Have you understood anything as to how the fault came about from debrief or conversations you've had since getting out of the car?
Not yet. I just know we started the race with an empty battery, which basically created a lot of troubles for us.
Right, Calum, should we start talking Saturday qualifying then? Of course, we've got to start with the big highlight of the qualifying session, which was Max going off, didn't even get to set a lap at all, going out in Q1. He's crashed into turn 1. What can you tell us, what insight can you give us to why that might have happened? We've got a vague idea, but can you give any more insight, Calum?
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough moment, wasn't it? I think we're so used to not seeing Max have these kind of accidents that it takes us by surprise a little bit. But yeah, my understanding from when I saw it, it was quite clear that the rear wheels just sort of locked. And I I think it happens so quickly, whether it's to do with the harvesting or the way that we were using the harvesting system. It was quite clear that rear wheel lock was something that was never going to be savable. Once it happened in that condition, you're sort of a passenger almost immediately. So disappointing for sure, especially as, I think we've gone through all of pre-season testing, all of practice this week, and not really seen any of these issues. And it's always a little bit disappointing because you kind of just hope that you've found all of these gremlins already. But yeah, I think you'd rather have this happen at race 1, right, than race 20.
This is possibly something we might see as a bit of a gremlin across the grids in these early, 50-50 engine regulations. I don't think this will be the last time we see something like this happen.
No, and I totally agree with you. And it is about the fact that you've only got the rear wheels to harvest energy. I've had loads of people ask me this week, why do we never see this in WEC? And, you forget that you've got 4 axles there working to harvest the energy. So it's completely different. This is going to be a really technical set of regs. It's an incredible challenge for all the engineers. But like we said, there's going to be these gremlins that we just have to work through, and you are only going to find out about it when you find out about it.
Yeah, and that was quite clearly one of, like you said, Max was not catching that. It's one of them. We saw, brief step forward to the race where Oscar had his incident before the race even began, and these cars are going to catch drivers out. So it is going to take a while to settle in. But I'll tell you what, as much as that was disappointing on Max's side of the garage, Isack Hadjar. Come on, Calum, let's talk about it, mate.
I know, talk about like a weekend of 2 halves for both the drivers. Obviously, Max having that in qualifying, but then really having a very good race to finish where he did. And then Isack doing such a brilliant job, first race with the team, putting it on the second row. I think I saw the onboard from Isack as he crossed the line, and I got the impression from his head movement that he felt that he probably could have found a little bit more. And that's great to see as well, like that sort of willingness to always say, I can be better and do better. But what a great start from him. All praise. I feel really bad for him that he's had, the DNF on Sunday that he's had. But look, I think he will look at the positives from this weekend. There's nothing he could have done about the DNF on Sunday, but he did do everything that he could on Saturday, and I think that was great. What a good start.
100%, man. I think the mindset there with Isack of never being quite satisfied feels like it's going to serve him well in this sport. I'll be honest, in the chat ahead of this podcast, I was, after qualifying, I was like, all 4 Red Bull powertrain cars into Q3. Of course, forgetting about Max. That's definitely my bad. Which is so great to see, of course, Arvid and Liam also running the Red Bull 4 powertrain. 4 out of the 10 Q3 cars powered by this brand new engine, which was great to see. But yes, back onto Isack. Yeah, I think his mentality is amazing. He's up there now with best initial qualifying results for Oracle Red Bull Racing drivers. Daniel Ricciardo got a P2 on debut. Isack Hadjar joint now with Sebastian Vettel with a P3 and Max Verstappen with a P4. So great company.
Yeah, for sure. And, that was, as you said, the best qualifying performance we've seen in a debut since Max, right?
100%,
which
yeah.
That can only bode well at this point.
Yeah, I think, as well, that... We've not seen too much of Max and Isack, obviously, together as teammates. It's right at the start of this relationship, but they do seem very, similarly wired. I feel like I get that impression. I feel like they bounce off of each other quite well. And Isaac's going to learn so much from Max, right? What are the things you think Isaac's going to pick up most from Max Verstappen?
Well, I think, like we say, it's quite clear that even early on, he's got this raw pace. When I talk about Max, one of the things that I say it's been great for us to see is how he's developed all of the other skills that he's now so good at. The raw pace was always there. It's all of the other bits, the racecraft, the spare capacity to look at the bigger picture. So I think from our point of view, having Isack with Max, I think he'll pick up those things probably even quicker than Max did. He seems like he's ready to do just that. So yeah, look, I think the thing for me, one of the things I think about when I think about Isack is he's quite tough on himself. And I think that he'll probably learn to sort of be a little bit easier on himself in some way. And obviously you want to maintain that drive to win and all the other things. But I think that Max will help him to understand that really being like your harshest critic sometimes can actually be quite detrimental. I don't think it is for him at the moment, but I think that it's one of those things that having Max there will be a really good influence on him.
And I think, he's going to be keen to make an impression. As much as this isn't his first season in F1, he made a great impression, fantastic impression in the Racing Bulls last season. Yeah, he will be keen to step up. And yeah, when you've got Max, again, you very, very rarely see Max go out in Q1. And I think that only added to the pressure for Isack to be like, right, can you deliver? And he absolutely delivered. So yes, I think all in all, again, these gremlins are going to be a factor, but qualifying was a pretty strong start. And then, yeah, we just break through the race, I suppose, because, off of the line, what did you make of the start? Not even from an Oracle Red Bull Racing point of view, but just the start more generally, because there was a lot of buzz, a lot of excitement, a lot of anticipation of how these cars, mosquitoes on the start line, just all revving, and then eventually they get away. What did you make of it, Calum?
Watching these opening laps for me was great because I think we got to see in those opening laps in real time the drivers learning how they were going to have to manage this energy deployment in race conditions. So it was chaotic, and that did settle as they learned as the race went on. But I think one of the great things about it being that way was that this season, I'm pretty sure all of the circuits are going to pose such different challenges in terms of this energy management. So I expect that I think we can expect to see that race starts are going to continue to be that kind of chaotic for a while.
And especially around a track like Australia, which is more of a challenge for these battery units to stay topped up, right? We saw a lot of super clipping in qualifying, which, when you watch the onboard as a fan, it is very jarring. To me, at least, I did not, at the end, you're losing 50 kilometers of an hour at the end of that straight. That didn't feel right.
It was that entry to turn 9 and 10. I think when you watch the onboards and you see the D rate and the dropping of the speed whilst the driver's essentially still on throttle, it is a little disheartening. But look, again, I think it's one of those things that Melbourne in particular is a very, very difficult track to harvest energy. I think it's going to be quite different when China, what a completely different challenge as a circuit. Right. Sure. So yeah, look, I think it's easy to look at that in qualifying and saying, look, and I agree with you. For me, it's not what I want from F1 racing. Certainly not in qualifying. I want to see drivers absolutely flat out and to the limit and trying to keep the car on four wheels. I don't necessarily want to see that kind of energy management through a qualifying lap. But we're early. We're early in these regs. I think everybody needs to just exercise a little bit of calm. And allow the engineers to work around the issues. Look, I very vividly remember 2014, and the complaints we had about the regulations then. So I don't think there's any cause to be panicking after race one.
Yes, and I do think it's kind of funny that, typically it's the drivers towards the front who maybe aren't complaining quite so much as the rest, which is kind of always
surprising.
The case. I know, shock, right?
Yeah.
Who'd have thought it? No, I completely. I think you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think yes, qualifying, as a sell to the fan base, because you definitely noticed, I think, watching the feed as well, that communicating the when when the overtake mode's being used. I'm going to get that mixed up all the time this year. It was very clear in the previous generation when you had the DRS flap open, which was the performance differentiator that you gained. You could see that. It was visual. It didn't really need to say, DRS is open. You could literally see it with your eyes. Now you can't see that. So that's something I think the feed's got to get on top of as well, Cam.
Yeah, for sure. I think certainly some visual indicators for fans of what cars are doing. Something that's not just when you bring up a graphic for two cars that are racing, but something that you can sort of always keep track of.
Agree.
And what drivers are doing, I think, will be really important. I think we need to get that sorted.
Yeah, and I think how much, your insight into the sport is so unique because you've actually been there, done that. Is it taking that information and disseminating it in a way that the average F1 fan can understand it, particularly when the regulations are so complicated now. I mean, we saw many drivers over the course of the weekend when they're asked questions about why did this happen, and they were like, look, I don't know how to explain this in like the 5 seconds I've got. You know, what chance have the fans got? That this is the balance of F1, I think, trying to communicate. Because I think actually the beauty is in the nuance and understanding these things, but you need to educate the fan base bit by bit, I think, rather than chucking it all out there at once.
I totally agree. But one of the things I'll say is that I think rather than necessarily a verbal communication as to what's going on, I think that the visual indicators are going to be really important. I think having those visual indicators is probably going to be more powerful in terms of people just sort of figuring it out and working out what's going on. So I think that's probably the first thing to do. You know, I think in terms of explainers, with the different modes and boost and overtake and all of this, yeah, you can do all the explainers. But I think in terms of when we're watching a race on a Sunday, we definitely need these visual indicators.
Yeah, for sure. And so, of course, coming on to the Grand Prix Sunday, let's start with Isack. Of course, the car gave up the ghost. The engine conked out fairly early doors in the race. And yeah, I mean, it was... Calum, what's the kind of... When that happens, especially, there seemed to be fire as well, from what I saw. Am I misremembering that? I think there was a bit of fire. So how, from your position at the team when you were kind of in the garage, what is the debrief? How quickly are the team kind of bringing that car back and you know, trying to understand what happened? Are they just getting that car out as soon as possible, or are they trying to kind of understand the nuances of what exactly happened in that moment?
You know, the car will get back to the garage. You're lucky if you get it back sort of 20 minutes, half an hour after the race finish. The first thing with these is always to get it plugged in and start downloading the data. You know, that's going to give you the biggest indicator of where you went wrong. How many finishers did we have in the end today? 16?
I think it was 16. We're not counting Lance because he was like 15 laps down, I think, which we're not counting now. Sorry, Lance.
Okay, fine. So even if we call it 15, I've got to be honest, that's from my view, I had 12 cars in mind today. That was the number I had in my head in terms of finishers. So perhaps it's gone better than expected. You know, you don't know what teams have had to do throughout the race in order to manage the issues. Because I think if you're in a position where you say, look, I know I'm not competing for points or whatever, but at this stage in the season, you're just going to keep the car on track. It's such valuable data.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I think it's one of those things. Again, I will always say that finding a problem is better than not finding it until it really hurts you. We're not in a championship battle in race one of this 2026 season, right? No one's in a championship battle in race one. So yeah, if you're going to have it, it's the best place to have it, is what it is.
Yeah, for sure, man. And of course, then on to Max, who... incredible recovery drive, got to be said, making his way all the way through, almost getting Lando at the end. Max said in his debrief, you know, maybe we should have had mediums. Obviously had to run 2 sets of hards, which kind of wasn't ideal from that point of view. But the energy management, pretty satisfied, a lot of deg and grain in, not happy with his start, but still made positions early doors. This is what Max does, right? When he does find himself in these positions, he seems to always be able, doesn't matter what regulation cycle we're in, to pick his way through, pick his battles, and almost end up kind of best of the rest behind the 2 Ferraris and Mercedes.
Look, I think sometimes that's the situation you find yourself in, right? And I think one thing I've quite enjoyed early in this year is Max seems very calm. He seems very at ease with where we're at and the fact that we're on a path, that we're progressing. But he's always, you know, give him the opportunity to do something like that. He's always going to go and deliver and overtake every single car that he can. Interesting you say about the starts, because actually going back to Isack, the initial part of his start looked really good, like his initial launch. And then I don't know, maybe perhaps there was like a sort of second stage energy deployment or anything like that, but he just seemed to lose a little bit of time in that second phase. Perhaps it's a learning thing for the driver themselves. Obviously, did you know we had so much talk about these starts, right? Especially in pre-season, everyone's talking about, these starts, they're going to be chaotic. Actually, the first bit was fine, right? It was all fairly normal. Yeah. Ferrari got the great starts that we were kind of expecting they would anyway.
Absolutely.
But yeah, look, I think, you know, Max showing that the car's clearly got this potential. You know, we passed a lot of cars today. I'm assuming that we made the most overtakes of anyone out there today.
Yeah, surely.
Yeah, it has to be. So yeah, look, I come out of Australia saying, okay, we learned one lesson the hard way with Isack, but you look at the other cars and ultimately, I think we should be pretty pleased with where we've come. You look at the size of the project that we took on with these power units. I think you come out of it pretty happy.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, actually, how quickly those lights went out at the start. I mean, I was very tired. I'll be honest. Watching it caught me napping. I was like, "Oh, we've already started."
Yeah, absolutely. It stood out to me as well.
Arvid gained loads of places. We saw, I think, a bunch of drivers gain massively and lose out massively. But again, I think so much of it is track specific as well. There's so much talk this weekend about Ferrari's small turbo, how it's going to benefit them. Not so much around Australia, because Australia is more of a power hungry track that will reward a bigger turbo. Again, at this early point of the season, like, we all want to make massive kind of takes and like, oh yeah, this is, but like, so much of it's track specific. These cars are going to change massively. You know, next weekend in China, there's going to be, you know, so many upgrades to most of these cars. I think it's just going to be a development race. And is this the part of the season where, you know, you're incentivized to push aggressively from a development point of view, because, you know, the field is so as spread as it is ever going to be within this regulation cycle?
Yeah, I think, look, depending on where you are in the grid, there's certainly merit in the idea that if you can steal points here and there early in the season, especially if you're, you know, some of the teams, they know that over the course of a season, they're probably going to be out-developed. So I think, you know, if you're in the position of one of those teams, getting those early points in can be really crucial come the end of the season. I mean, you know, when I heard him talking about sending Fernando Alonso back out, even though he was 2 laps down, ultimately he retired. But actually, when you think about it, you never know how that can come to fruition later on in the year and be really helpful. So yes, I think there is an incentive to try and close this gap as quickly as you can. Obviously with the risk of, you rush too much, you can end up going down a bad pathway. So I think as long as you're happy that you are on the right path and that your concept works and is foundationally sound, then yeah, absolutely. This season here is a development race for everyone. I'm going to be honest with you, the way I look at it right now, whilst I think that perhaps there's opportunity that others can challenge Mercedes as the season goes on, they've started in a really good place, right? I'm going to be honest, the deservedly smug look that Toto has had over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, I've seen that look before. It was the look that, yeah, it was the look that he had when we were in the garage next door to him between 2014 and 2020, right? They're going to be tough to beat from this position that we're in right now. But like you said, you know, a season's only a season. You do well of developing this year, you don't know where you can start next.
Do you have a inkling, say Max had qualified, you know, P2, maybe P3, P4, do you have an inkling where his pace would have left him by the end of the race, assuming no breakdown, assuming where do you think he would have finished ahead of the Ferraris perhaps, or in the middle, just behind?
I think it's quite tough. I think if you also consider that we would have still had Isack's failure, it then would have left Max fighting essentially 4 cars by himself, right? 2 Mercs, 2 Ferraris. So that's where that would get skewed. I think on outright pace, I don't think we were going to be challenging Mercedes for a race win. And I always get the impression that, you know, George would have been smart enough that there was a point today where both of them would have only been driving as fast as they needed to. They will have had something up their sleeve for if they were really challenged by the Ferraris towards the end. But yeah, like I said, I always say as well, I'd rather be in the position of the hunter than the hunted. But I don't think you can really understate the challenge. Like I said, I've seen this look from Toto before, man, and they're going to be a tough nut to crack. You know, I think. I often say that we spent all those years from 2014 to 2020. It was like a building process for us. We were learning, we were seeing all the things that they did really well, and all those things that they did really well then, they still do really well now.
It does feel like where the energy management, side of things is so much more important. You know, the ERS is like 3 times bigger than it was in the previous generation of cars. So yes, that is where I think, you know, at the end of last season, I sat down at the headquarters with, you know, a bunch of technical personnel from the team, and speaking to, you know, Ekiner and Pip from Powertrains. They were like, you know, this is a long-term project where being able to build up your own engine facility for the very first time for Oracle Red Bull Racing is going to pay dividends, but it's going to take time relative to HPP that's been established for so many years now. Same with Ferrari. And like you say, I think it's a long-term play. The wheels have been set in motion for years now, and finally the engine's out there. I think the engine has surpassed most people, certainly my expectation for sure. I would say like the engine's been way more competitive. Reliability is a separate factor entirely. We saw the Audis go very well in qualifying, and then Nico couldn't even start the race because of a car issue. So I agree. Actually, I think the customer team tax is higher than it's been for quite a while now in F1. We do have a few questions. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions on the YouTube community page of the Oracle Red Bull Racing YouTube channel. So if you do want to get involved in these podcasts, we'll be putting the question out about 5 laps or 5 minutes, I can't remember what we said, before the race ends. So be sure to check out after the Chinese Grand Prix, so you can submit your questions there. First one, considering how well Max came back in the race, he gained 14 places plus Isack's qualifying performance. Do you think the car has potential to fight with the Ferraris for the podium and later on the season for the win with them and Mercedes? Now, of course, we've already spoken about this race, but perhaps, later on in the season, do you think this car, this team has potential to fight for wins with Mercedes, or are we asking for a bit too much too soon?
No, I don't think so. I think, like we said, overall, the pace wasn't that bad, right? I think the pace was pretty good. As we said, the performance of the power unit has probably exceeded expectations. And actually, I tell you what was key for me this weekend was hearing Pierre Wache post-qualifying. Now, I love Pierre, right? But I can tell you that getting an optimistic outlook from Pierre is very, very hard, right? I used to go and see Pierre before a race in 2023 and say, how are we looking today? And it was straight away, I was like, oh, well, you know, it could be okay. That's just Pierre. So when I heard his comments post-qualifying and he's talking about the fact that, you know, this convergence on the chassis side and there's ground to be made there, I absolutely think that there will be opportunities this year to win races.
And again, the development race is going to be so quick. I do wonder how do teams strike a balance between, you know, bringing lots of upgrades, lots of smaller upgrades versus less frequent, bigger upgrades. How do you, from your understanding, working within the team, how are those kind of decisions made, and what's the typical method with maybe Pierre and his technical team?
They're just a tough breed to understand for sure. But look, I think it kind of depends if you've got a fundamental flaw, then you're probably likely to bring, you know, specific upgrades that might be smaller, but tackle that particular flaw. In the past, we have also seen seasons where we sort of have gaps between what we bring to the circuit, but then we bring really big packages that have been well proven out. I don't know where the sort of deficits and what we're chasing, you know, it really is a good question for Pierre. But I think there will be many different approaches among teams this year in terms of how they do it. I think a lot of teams will be bringing up upgrades that are for reliability rather than performance. I'd like to think that we're in a position where we're comfortable enough that we can focus on sort of fixing the chassis deficits and hopefully make some ground.
For sure. And even, you know, this was, I remember at the start of 22, the last new regulation cycle, just getting the cars down to weight and getting the cars underweight so you can add ballast to then redistribute the, you know, minimum weight in the most optimum fashion. You know, that's going to be something that's going to be continuously iterated on throughout the next, 4 or 5 years, right?
I don't know where. It's kind of nice. I kind of enjoy not necessarily knowing too much about it, and I get to enjoy the races as a bit more of an out and out fan of motor racing.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, so I don't know where we are on weight. I haven't heard anyone massively complain about it though.
Yeah, and look, these are cards we want to keep somewhat close to our respective chests. Any Mercedes, Ferrari personnel out there watching, we see you. Another fan question: is it easier to overtake due to these new regulations? What kind of judgment did you get on it as a spectator watching, Cal?
I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I think that there are probably more opportunities to overtake, but I think picking the wrong place is probably like far more detrimental than it was previously, right? So, you know, if you go and expend all your energy to dive down the inside of the corner, you're just screwed when you come out of the following one. You know, and we saw so much of that in the opening laps, didn't we? You know, cars back and forth. What did we see? We saw like 7 changes for the lead in like the first 10 laps.
Which is
like
great,
I said, it's about this
I
learning
was
process.
loving it. I was absolutely loving it.
Me too. Yeah, for sure. It was, you know, it's exciting racing. And I know that there are going to be those purists out there that say, oh, well, this isn't really how racing should be. But ultimately, like, I sit here as a race fan right now. I enjoyed watching it. You know, I really enjoyed the Australian GP today. I thought it was fascinating.
That was a quality race. That was definitely from a spectator spectacle point of view. It was worth getting up for sure. And obviously, how much of that is down to the fact that, you know, fortunately there was a Ferrari and a Mercedes at the front that were able to toss up positions between the two of them, but also actually throughout the field. And you mentioned say about the overtaking point. You know that. There were quite a few times where I noticed like there'd be 2 cars, like, you know, at one point Behrman and Ocon were right next to each other, and then all of a sudden Ocon just dipped loads of places and then gained again, and then and it did seem to swing a lot. There was a little, you know, Bortoletto, Gasly, Ocon battle that kind of didn't play out live. I was looking at the timing, which is still a problem. You look at the side and it's like, it's 0.2 of a second. I'm like, why are we not looking at this? But you did see a lot more back and forth, I felt anyway. And again, how much of it is a lack of understanding, meaning there's more variability? I imagine as these regulations mature and the teams gain understanding of how to absolutely optimize their deployment, then there will be less variability in that instance, but also the car's performance should get closer together. It's kind of like in the last regulation cycle, you know, at the start of the year, you had Max and Charles scrapping in Bahrain. It was amazing, but the performance differential between the field spread was huge. Whereas at the end of the regulation cycle, the field spread was really small, but the dirty air, because they add so much performance to these cars, kind of spoilt the racing.
Yeah, I hear you. I think the way that I would describe sort of the overtaking challenge this year is I wouldn't say it's necessarily easier to overtake, but I certainly think it's easier to get it wrong. And when you do get it wrong, it's going to cost you way more. I think, you know, where in the past you can get an exit wrong or mismanage something and it might cost you a place. I think we saw today that you get that wrong, it can cost you 2-3 places. Right, so I think the stakes are almost higher.
100%, absolutely. And you mentioned, Calum, obviously that, you know, the purist point of view. I would urge fans out there who are super skeptical and almost maybe considering, oh, hang on, is this generation of F1 for me? I think I've seen enough today, in my opinion, and I feel like I'm a pretty purist racing fan. You know, I started touring cars back in the day. That's what I enjoyed most and fell into love with F1 over time. And I love rally and I love, you know, WEC and anything racing, I'm all over it. And the thing is, I can understand it. I can absolutely understand it. You watch these onboards, you watch the onboard on the official F1 YouTube channel of George Russell's pole lap, and you're seeing this clipping, and it's stinky. I don't like that. But if the racing's quality, which we did see many pockets of fantastic racing today, for me, if that's the trade-off that needs to happen within this regulation cycle, it's not perfect, of course. I'd love for everything to be perfect, but also we moan about every single regulation change. So is that just part
That's what
of
we
it?
do best. No, I think you're right. And actually, talking of sort of the racing, I think one of the things And I'm interested to see how it sort of progresses with the stewards. But, we've made this change to sort of the driving standards whereby the stewards are trying to get involved less, right? They're not going to get involved unless there's something that's deliberate or really egregious or dangerous. And I think that's been needed for a long time. And I thought it was quite interesting today. George came and had a little bit of a whinge about Charles quite early on and the way he chose to defend. And I think that over time he'll just stop doing that, and they'll just get on with it. And I think it's absolutely needed, right? Let them get on with it. They're all professional race drivers, right? And that was good to see today. I was glad to see that the stewards just sort of, for the most part, said, well, there's nothing dangerous or egregious there. We're going to stay out of it. And I think it contributed to better racing.
Yeah, no, I don't think we saw a single penalty outside of Colapinto for a starting infringement.
I was going to say, yeah, it was Colapinto got one for something. Someone was, I think, investigated for driving too slowly.
You had Gasly and Ocon, they had a little ding dong and nothing came of that. You had Checo and Liam. Again, nothing was. So yeah, it's almost like in football where players dive because they feel like it gets a reward, but if you just take that reward out of it and punish it, then you're going to stop it. So I agree. That should again, I think, play into, if you're looking from a purist point of view, that racing, again, allow these drivers who want more than anyone to just be able to race and focus on the racing, let them do their thing.
Yeah, this is it. I think, look, they're all so smart that if you set them these sort of ridiculous rules, they're going to drive to the rules rather than racing the person next to them, right? Because that's just the smart thing to do. So I think it was refreshing today to sort of see no stewards penalties handed out for things that are debatable or whatever. So that was good. We got a little bit of something back. So if you are the purist, you are getting something back.
Come on. And look, I mean, we know that Max has made his feelings clear about his feelings towards this rules. However, that Max will take what is given, even if it's a shopping trolley, as he said to media. And we've got to work on some kind of content, because I feel like Sky Sports are going to try and beat us to that punch. We need to work on something. This is a direct message to Oracle Rebel Racing. Me and Calum in shopping
Absolutely,
trolleys.
I like it. I like any kind of racing. Like, I reckon Max would drive a lawnmower and he'd absolutely kill it. Like, I want to see all this stuff.
I want to see
I reckon I might beat
swing.
him on a lawnmower. There's a challenge.
Do you reckon?
Oh, mate, I'm up for it.
You're back. Also, another fan question. How do you stand on overtake and boost modes? Do you feel they make it harder to race because the person you can pass can almost immediately pass you back? I mean, for me, I think most of that for me is because of the lack of understanding and the learning curve that immediately being able to re-overtake, because you want to feel like moves that are being done on merit rather than just as a byproduct of the rules, if you know what I mean. Like, have I explained that well?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think you're right. It was the lack of understanding, because you look at that was the case for the opening sort of 15 laps where, you can see a move get done and then it gets undone the next corner. But that wasn't the case at the end of the race. This lot, they learn quick, right? And I think especially when you look at Max chasing down Lando towards the end of that race, at first you kind of got the impression that Max was probably going to comfortably breeze by. But actually, that extra learning of that 40 laps that they'd done in terms of how they manage their energy, it pretty much evened itself out. So I think it's one of those things that if you look at it and you just took that opening of the race, you'd say, oh yeah, maybe this is a bit much that cars can just get back past one another. But I don't think that that's something that we'll see from the regulations long term. I think it's just part of this learning curve.
Yeah, the convergence is going to get there in terms of the cars, but also, the driver's understanding of how to maximise the rules. Now, I'm chuffed we had a good race, because I was concerned. The sentiment online was very, very negative after qualifying. And from what I saw anyway, just because again, qualifying is meant to be when you fully open the taps and see these cars at their quickest. And when you'll get that section, those quick, I can never remember corner numbers, the quick left right hander or Australia is such, you see fan cameras of people recording that, and the cars are flying through it. It's like one of those rare corners. I had noticed it years ago. I went to Miami, and I was sat at the kind of S's section, and seeing the cars go through that section on a Saturday quali was incredible. It's so cool seeing them go through there. And when they're dropping 50 kilometers an hour before, like, again, I get it. I do get it. And I don't know is there a solution, do you think, Cal? Or are we too early to try and, I don't know, fix something that maybe isn't a massive problem? Are we just complaining because we're hardcore fans?
No, I think it's a valid sort of concern, right? Again, like you say, in qualifying, one of the joys of Formula One is seeing cars on the absolute limit in qualifying. But I'm cautious of this doom and gloom, right? I don't want to see that, and I certainly don't want to see that on some of the other circuits where we've got these amazing fast corners. I don't want to see D rates when drivers should be flat out. But I also think that it's gonna take time, right, to make this work, mate. It didn't work very well at the beginning of 2014. Right, it was, and I tell you what, the gaps to Mercedes and everyone else were way bigger than what we've seen today. So I am optimistic that if this is where we're at race one, then I think it's not going to be long before we're actually all, if we're honest with ourselves, we're going to be sat here going, actually, this does work. So I'm optimistic.
And also, I think important to remember as well, this is a cost cap regulation era, which there are, of course, cons to cost cap, but I would say, broadly speaking, it does certainly allow that, Mercedes and Red Bull and Ferrari and the teams with the bigger budgets relative to the rest of the field can't just run away with the spend. And also, of course, the sliding development scale that we've had in place now for a number of years should hopefully, again, stop that massive, because, when Mercedes dominated from 2014 onwards, that was a very, very long period of, so many constructors' titles in a row, which we don't want to see again. We want this sport to be competitive, whoever the teams are.
I honestly don't think we're going to see that.
I completely agree. I think the sport's learnt enough from those, errors, mistakes. What the past, present, I think we're in a good place going forward. Looking forward to China, what will the team be, say, obviously the team's doing the pack up right now as we record this, the team will be packing up. First of all, how does it look from a logistics point of view, I guess, getting, the team, the personnel, the car from Australia to Shanghai? What does that process look like?
I always like to remind people that for a race mechanic, Sunday is your longest day. By the time you leave the circuit, your Sunday will be pretty much a 16-hour day of physical labour, right? So it is a huge challenge. And this, you got to remember as well, like, we are in the first race of the season, but this has been such a short off season until people were into pre-season testing, and it hasn't been one where you've had a great amount of rest and everybody feels refreshed. You come to Melbourne, you've been up against it for the last, month and a half already. But it's getting the car back. Obviously with Isack, it's a case of trying to diagnose that car before you start, stripping it apart. But ultimately the goal for the mechanics is to get the car in 3 pieces, get any parts off of it that need to go back to the UK for service, because there will be parts, especially early in a new reg set. The design office will tend to set a service interval that's a lot lower than what we saw in the last regulation set, where a lot of the parts we were comfortable with. So a lot of the parts in those cars are going to have quite a short service interval. So a lot of them will be stripped and be going back. And then it is just the race to get everything in the freight. And it's quite an interesting one. There are teams that are really good at it, some that are less so. I always think that our lot are just so busy enjoying the drum and bass that it just becomes a secondary priority.
Particularly around, obviously, Isack's power unit failure. How would the team back at base have mobilised? As soon as they'd have seen that, would people have immediately gone into action? And I'm talking more from the Milton Keynes side of things.
Yeah, I mean, even when the car was still out there, even as the failure happened, they'll have the initial data to suggest what's gone wrong.
Okay.
And absolutely, we've got the whole ops room full of people back at the factory. There's like 40 odd people, 30, 40 people sat in the ops room watching this race. So that information is very quickly shared back to Milton Keynes. And yeah, absolutely, you start putting into place a plan, whether there's going to be components coming home, whether that you need people trawling through data. And once you find out the extent of that, that plan sort of shapes itself in a way. I guess at this point as a team, you're just hoping that you haven't like completely lost components. It seems likely to me that we probably have today.
Yeah.
The sound and the look of that failure is, I imagine it's probably cost us a little bit. But yes, it's absolutely about having that plan in place before the parts get home. Right, there's no point waiting for everything to get home and go, right, let's have a look at this then. You really do have to have a really good structure, and powertrains are brilliant for it. We have our strip team, so I think that the first thing that will happen with that power unit, if anything comes home, is the strip crew will be the ones to start taking it apart and sort of inspecting it and laying out the damage, and then engineers and designers can come and look and find the root causes.
Sure, and I imagine the priority is going to be to find out whether that is an issue that is dormant within the other engines that just wasn't exposed on the day, because then that needs obviously fixing, and those are the kind of iterative learnings. Otherwise, it is going to happen again, right? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think obviously, I really don't know whether this was an internal combustion engine issue or whether it's an ESS issue. Two very different things, two very different processes in terms of diagnosing and fixing it. But yes, the imperative thing is to understand if this is an underlying issue or if there was perhaps an external influence that caused this in this particular instance.
And then, of course, debriefing from Australia versus looking ahead to China. How does that focus switch? Will it be, obviously everyone's thinking about debriefing now, and then on Monday all focus shifts to China? Like, how does that typically work after this first race of the season as well?
Well, I think, in order to start your China prep, you need to understand what happened here in Australia. I'm sure Max has been talking about things like tyres, and we talked about energy availability at the start. So all of that feedback that you get from the debrief goes into your plan, not just for China, but into your plan for things that you will want to test during practice in China. So it's quite an important turnaround in that the feedback's clear and that you're sort of all aligned on what the priorities are for China. But yeah, it's almost like a constant loop, right? Like I almost think of it, it's not just a one-way street, or it's not just something that happens once. It really is this constant thing, right? Of all of the things we learn today go into the prep for China, and as soon as the cars are out on circuit in China, that feedback loop continues with all the data that comes back from the cars. So you really have to think of it as like literally day and night.
Yeah.
It doesn't really stop.
The wheels never stop turning, do they? And of course, looking ahead to China, a track that is, I would say China gives a pretty broad, you've got the really long straight ahead of that really harsh braking zone towards the end of the lap. But also like sector 2 is super, twisty. Yeah. And of course that first corner is just that's going to be fascinating to see how these lower grip cars handle that. What are your kind of expectations? I'm thinking maybe more from the battery deployment harvesting point of view for China versus Australia.
What the thing that stands out to me about the layout of China is that you've got that very, very, very long straight, but then after that, you're straight back into like 2 more straights.
Yeah.
Now, I think we've seen how quickly you can deplete that sort of energy. So my kind of question mark in my head at the moment is, where do you find the opportunity to charge enough? Well, I guess my concern is after watching Melbourne is that halfway down that straight in China, we're going to start to see some massive derates, which is, I think, you know what? And I think it wasn't great to see it in Melbourne, but in the race, I think it probably helped overtaking into 9 and 10. We saw quite a lot of that today. In China, the kind of thing I'm hoping it doesn't take away from is those big brake moves down at the end of that straight, because that is, traditionally that is the popular place to have a go, get a tow, and then take a big late braking move into that. And I'm hoping that this doesn't stop us from seeing that. But I guess we'll find out in a week.
Let's wrap it there, fella, because we're talking for almost an hour. That time has flown by. We're going to be back again post-China. Any final thoughts, Cal?
Actually, I think my final thought was that I come out of the Australian Grand Prix a lot more optimistic for the standard of racing than I went into it, right? I think, if you purely read the sentiment across social media before you went into this, you would have thought that this was going to be an absolutely terrible race to watch. And it wasn't. I thoroughly enjoyed it, even though it didn't necessarily go the way we would have liked, and I was disappointed for Isack, but I definitely come out of the Australian Grand Prix a lot more hopeful than I went into it. And I think that's good. I'll take that for race one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, 100%. Like my confidence took a big knock after Saturday, but Sunday delivered. So I can't wait for China. Thank you all, wherever you are in the world, for tuning in on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you consume your podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, interact in any way you can. And again, after China, as the race is wrapping up, head to the YouTube channel, go to the community feed, and you can submit your questions there. Pleasure as always. We will see you next time.